Was the latest Star Wars show canceled because of a bunch of hyper-conservative bigots, or is there more to the story than that? Did the new season of Rings of Power live up to the hype? And at what age should parents allow their kids to have a smartphone? We talk about all that and more on this episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 26 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the alien abduction to my tinfoil conspiracy theory, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Not too much, Daniel. Good to be with you. I'm always down for a good... Have you heard any new alien abduction conspiracy theories?
Oh, they're out there. The conspiracy theories...
The truth is out there.
And the aliens are out there.
Do you have a favorite alien movie beside Alien?
I mean, Alien is called Alien, so you got to go with that one.
Yeah, but maybe more.
I'm a sucker for all,
yeah,
even the bad ones, and most of them are bad ones.
Yeah,
like anything that's like Independence Day is a classic, and
yeah.
I mean, there's been good.
Have you seen Close Encounters of the?
I haven't seen it all the way through,
or fourth, whatever it was. Yeah,
that
one's pretty good. I watched it. I think maybe last year for the first time. And it's actually quite good.
I mean, Signs by Shyamalan is a great one.
That's a good one.
It's hard to go wrong. That's it's like the Colonel's secret recipe for his chicken. Like you just throw in some alien invasion and you just got a good.
Yeah, I would say the whole series of Fringe.
Fringe is great. X-Files is great.
I watched like the first 2 episodes of like the first season of Fringe the other day, just because I saw it on the streaming. I was like, oh, that is.
Does it hold up?
Oh, it holds up. Yeah, it's so good. It's one of my favorites from history. So
I'm a total sucker for sci-fi, but not all is well in the world of sci-fi. Although it's debatable whether this is sci-fi or if it's actually more technically is a fantasy. But a space opera. But Star Wars. So Star Wars. I'm a Star Wars kid. I don't know if you were a Star Wars kid.
Yeah.
Or as much of a Star Wars kid, or you like the old Star Wars.
Oh yeah. I mean, I cut my teeth on the classics.
Because I've shared before, those were the first when a boy became a man. My dad, the first non-cartoon movies I ever saw, my dad went and rented those movies.
Yeah, I can't remember my first viewing of Star Wars. I don't know if it was quite as hey, this is a big thing, but I just remember really basically always loving it. I had older cousins that were into it as well, and so it was this is just the cool thing, and you get all the action figures and the Lego and the video games and the books that go into detail.
Oh yeah, I could
different ships.
Back in the day, I could tell you every creature name, alien. I went totally into it. And when I had kids, I mean, they couldn't even talk yet. I have videos of them watching Star Wars for the first time, and it's a classic. Their eyes are wide. It's when the Star Destroyer flies across the screen. Love Star Wars, but some of that passion has faded a little bit because
there's been a bit of a wet towel on the fire of the Star Wars flame as of late.
It just has. I still love Star Wars for what it was, and it's an important part of growing up. But it just hasn't been good. The show is my enthusiasm has I'm just not quite as enthusiastic or excited when they announce a new show or things. It's maybe I'll watch it, maybe I won't. If I'm going to watch anything, I'll just go back and watch the original. But apparently, I'm not alone. Because sort of a story, again, we don't want... I think this is more just leads to a wider discussion rather than just geeking out about Star Wars. So even if you don't care about Star Wars, I think there's still something here just for Christians to think about. But the most recent show that aired was Star Wars Acolyte, The Acolyte. And I will say right off the start, I did not watch the show. I had no desire to watch it. I think you watched...
I watched, 2 episodes, and... that was enough.
Which means you were swimming with the crowd because, according to the numbers, a lot of people tuned in for the first couple, and then it was just a nosedive, and then not many people finished it. Just heard from a lot of people that I know you, and I know you won't like this. And I saw the trailers and said, I don't think I'll like this. So I just didn't watch it. It just did not look good to me.
Which I feel like is saying a lot coming from someone who has a podcast about pop culture. The fact that you didn't watch this, I feel like says quite a lot.
Yeah, I could have got paid to watch this essentially.
Yeah,
and I still didn't watch it. And I'm not someone that's just being Disney Star Wars the work. I liked a lot of the Rogue One and Force Awakens. I haven't been one of the haters necessarily. but I'm moving that direction the way things have been going. But this show, again, finished airing its first season, very divisive, and it will be the first a one and done, because there's not going to be a second season. I think they teased a second season, and some cliffhangers that I guess we'll never know.
Yeah,
what could have happened. So this show was canceled, and again, shows get canceled all the time. People don't watch shows. They make new shows, no money. That in itself isn't quite as big of a story. But I think what's become more of a story is just like the conversation around this of like, I feel like it's like a mirror that reflects back a lot of just where we are as a culture and just sort of how we engage with these stories. Because there's been like, people have gone to war over this, like on both sides, like, they should have canceled it halfway through the first season. Why do we even have this?
What was the point of episode 2?
And then you have the other side that is very adamant that like taking it personally, that like this show is canceled and like it's wrong. We've let the haters win. And I think because of that, again, if you're not as like plugged into some of this, like the reason for that is because this show, I think like many shows in recent years, very much became like it wasn't just a show about space stuff. Like it was sort of this like cultural, like it was pulled into the culture war. Like this show represented something. Like,
I wouldn't say it was pulled into the culture war so much as it dove head first into the culture war.
It was not a reluctant.
No. It set out to be part of that war. Yeah.
Because there was talk, to pull a couple of the quotes, like before this thing came out, like a lot of the discussion, like more than just like, I wonder what characters or timeline, like it was all about more like the wider social implications. Because director Lacey Headland, before the show, or when it was announced, had made the remark that it would be coded queer. Because again, she is a queer person, and said she told in an interview that the goal was to allow her own personal experiences as a queer woman to shine through the finished product. Said there's no way that me being a queer woman is not going to be reflected in my work. I could try not to do it, but why would I? It just feels like a natural extension of what I do, is what she said at the time. So she was very much sort of pointing that direction. And like the cast too, like this was very, I mean, it was like female led and like people of color. Like it's a bunch of the social things, which like, again, some of those things in their own obviously aren't bad, but like that was the selling point of the show. It wasn't just the show or why, the storyline. Like it was, this show represents, this is like they presented it as very much like this is our response to all you bigoted haters out there that can't deal with this stuff. Like, we're going to give it to you. And then no one took it and it got canceled. and because of that, it's become sort of the response. Because the actress, star Amanda Steinberg, who plays, I think, two of the main characters who are twins in this show, she made right after it was canceled a couple of days ago, she made like a heartfelt Instagram video sort of unpacking her feelings. Again, I don't blame actors and stuff for being upset that their thing was canceled. Like, sure, they should be upset. That's like if I had a book or something and they're going to pull it from the shelves. Like, no issue with that.
Hopefully, people care if they care about what they're doing. If they care about their job, like people should care if their show gets canceled. I think that's totally legitimate. Yeah,
where things start to slide into the dark side is the reason she gives for this. Because again, you can just look at, we don't need to go through her whole video, but essentially she blames hyper-conservative bigotry. So very much, people didn't watch this show and it's canceled, not because it wasn't a good show, but because like a bunch of those bigots, those conservatives that like just hate women and people of color and the LGBTQ community and all these things, like they're the problem. Yeah, and you have a bunch of these haters online, and now Disney seems to just march to their drumbeat, and this is like this big, we've lost is sort of the language of this. And it's interesting because I feel like this show, it's like more out there because it's Star Wars, and like Star Wars is a huge property. Yeah, but like this idea just seems to be everywhere. Like I think this is just another reflection of how much like kind of pop culture is no longer just like stories. I mean, if it ever was, but like just stories, but like it's very much this sort of war. These are vehicles for ideologies and like clashing of, and to not like this one thing is not to not like that thing. Is to not like everything that it represents or its creators believe in or its actors and actresses believe in. But what are some of your thoughts? Like, are the conservative hyper bigots to blame, or?
Well, clearly, clearly that's the problem. It couldn't be any other issue with this show. But to maybe use the language of our time, I think, and I will say both sides, because we'll kind of get into this is kind of a mirror of the other side maybe of entertainment. But you see this is maybe the weaponization of entertainment, or the weaponization of culture or pop culture, as an example, because so much of the talk before, during, and after the show has almost nothing to do with the show itself, but it's all to do with the message of the show, what the show represents, what it means for certain kinds of people. Like, none of the interviews were really like, hey, we're telling this really interesting story and we're doing some new stuff with the franchise. It was all like, this is important, go see it, because we're sort of aiming high with this show because the message is important, because these are important values or messages that we want to get out. Not so much, this is a great, entertaining show or interesting story that we're telling, or nuanced story that we're telling, or worth your time to watch a story. It's like, no, we're telling this because these are important messages that the people, all the hyper-conservative bigots need to hear. And when you lead with that tells me everything that I need to know, and why I only watched 2 episodes.
And there is, this is the thing that just drives me crazy. I could go do a whole episode on a rant about this, but I won't. But I'll just tease my rant.
Half an episode.
Half an episode. But it's this. It's almost this like persecution complex of like, you see it on like social media all the time, where like someone will just throw out like the most inflammatory statement, that's this ridiculous and like this, flamethrower on what everyone's values and believes in, and then people will be like, no, that's actually a terrible take, or like,
you're wrong.
You're wrong. And then it's like, oh, I'm so persecuted, people just coming after me, and like, it's like when people make something like a very aggressive, they make it about something. And then people like respond in kind, and then it's, oh, well, I'm just sort of this victim of this world. And it's like, well, no, like,
you sort of asked for it.
Yeah, it's like if you're gonna make, it's like this. If you're gonna make it about just sort of these ideologies, and it's like this vehicle for these messages and things, like, then like again, I don't think it excuses people from being like people shouldn't be a jerk about that. And there is a lot of the hyper-conservative bigot. Like there is a segment of the culture that very much is like, they hated this show the minute they heard who she was and that she was a queer lady, like regardless of if that came into the show or not. Like there is some of that, but like there's a lot of like people that didn't watch the show, and it wasn't just those people, but like just sort of that idea of like, because I feel like Christians can do that too, of like, we want to speak hard truth to the culture, and we just act like a big jerk about, hey, believe in Jesus, you sinless, godless heathen, you terrible person, we're going to go burn in hell, and I guess you probably deserve it. And then it's like people,
it's like, no, that was a dumb movie.
Yeah. And then people like push back, and then it's like, oh, see, well, they persecuted Jesus. They're going to, but it's sort of this idea, because like you said, in some ways, this is like the secular equivalent of what we talked about a couple weeks ago, of like the Forge. Like, I think this isn't just like this political group or this, Hollywood issue. Like, it's become is a thing in general. Like a movie like The Forge very much it's a message, and we're going to present it, and all the press about it and like PR is going to be about the message. And like, you got to like it as a Christian because of the message. Like if you don't like it, you're letting them win. Like Hollywood wins if you don't say this movie is a 5-star, changed your life.
And you probably don't love Jesus.
Yeah, and you're probably not a Christian, so you probably are one of those godless heathens. Like, and just sort of that language. Like when you step back, like it's crazy talk. Like, oh, so I'm not like, to love Jesus, I gotta like this movie. Like I got like every work ever made by Christian art.
I have to have the same taste in entertainment that you have. Like,
yeah, like
that's kind of an absurd.
It's like
statement.
It's like one of the we lost in translation with the Hebrew in the Bible of like that was one of the commandments. Thou shalt like what every other Christian likes for like. But it's because we've just sort of got this, like, because movies have become these vehicles, like they represent things rather than they're just, hey, there's stories. Like, hey, some stories are good, aren't, some are just indifferent. You like something, I don't like that thing, and vice versa. Like, and it's just, I feel like it's just such a testament to where we are.
Yeah.
Like, we have such a hard time approaching these shows and movies from a perspective outside of just all the baggage of the culture war and the cultural stuff and politics and ideologies that everything gets reduced down to that.
Yeah, we've I think, infused politics into all of the art that we're making these days. And I think most accessibly in like movies and TV shows. And I think because of that, and now we've weaponized TV shows and movies to sort of serve this greater narrative purpose of whatever it is we believe politically, that I mean, that's what this is. Like, I'm going to make a movie and it's going to be a club to hit my political opponents with, and then my political opponents will make a movie, and now it's a club to hit us with. And it's just this very unproductive and, I think, secondary usage of art that is just incredibly dumb, I think.
It's just like
at the base.
Sometimes the answer is simpler than we think. Like, for sure, like this, like, was it canceled because of a bunch of bigots? Like, are there bigots and angry people on YouTube and stuff? Like, yeah,
sure.
Of course there are. There always been. Like, that's just part of what the internet is. But like, sometimes it's simpler than that. Like, this show cost like $200 million to make. Like,
and it was a bad show.
Ridiculous amount of money.
Yeah.
And like, you can't have a show that costs that much and be that divisive and have that few people watch. Like,
yeah,
like that's just a business decision. That's not they clearly hate women because a woman led that. Like,
right.
No, like they hate losing hundreds of millions of dollars, and this shows. Like, so why we're not going to do that again? Like, we're not going to. Maybe if this show was like $20 million, it's like, okay, you know what? People hate it. Some people watch it. That's fine. But like for these big productions, like they just can't do that. Like, it makes total sense to not do. I think anyone that thought they were going to do it, it would only be for the non-biz. Like, it would only be, well, we support the message and we're willing to make a terrible business decision.
Yeah.
Like, and you do see that happen.
Well, and there have been sort of political tax write-offs, essentially. It's like, we'll make this TV show or movie knowing that it's not going to make any money, but it's more profitable for us to just kind of use it as a tax write-off or some essentially equivalent of like, hey, we'll throw a few bones.
Like, it's like, people on Twitter, this is going to get some applause on Twitter. People are going to really like what we're doing with these characters. Not going to make money, but you know what? We're building goodwill or something like that. Like, that does happen. But I do think, again, sometimes like just a bunch of hyper-conservative bigots aren't always the problem. Like,
right.
I think it goes beyond that. And I think as Christians, and just as anyone, I hope we can like learn to step back a bit and be like, you know what? It is a business. There is other factors. It's not always just our simplistic culture war. If you like this, it's because you believe this outside of the movie. Sometimes it's a lot simpler than that.
Well, and I just think the reduction of art to its message, I just think it's just a bad way to look at things. And I think you end up in these places where you feel personally attacked because somebody didn't like the thing that you made when, like, it wasn't very likable. Messaging aside, like, you didn't execute it well. Like, and so you could look at, The Forge or The Acolyte. It's like they had very strong messages. Both were very poorly executed, and they weren't entertaining. And they only succeeded in putting the message in like movie form, and that was about the extent of it. And so it's like you can not like something because that something is bad, regardless of whatever the message is behind whatever that is.
Yeah, and you just see people are just reluctant to like criticize. Like, I know that was like the Obi-Wan show, like the Reva character.
Yeah.
She's like, she's a woman, and she's a woman of color, and like, and I think the actress is fine, but like the terrible character.
Yeah, it was.
But it's like all the conversation, like people just tiptoeing around that because like, well, like I don't hate black people, like I don't hate women, like it's like, well, of course you don't, like,
but like
I criticize a white actor. I'm not going to hate white people. Like, I just think the role's bad. Like, it's written bad, didn't belong. Like, but just there is this sense that like because they're so equated,
right?
We're just reluctant. Right? I like Jesus. I just don't maybe just 1.5 thumbs up for the Forge, like because we're so scared to like the associations. Again, that's just not how art has ever worked. But speaking of a bunch of mad people on the internet complaining about and writing off shows for various cultural war reasons, Rings of Power is back.
Oh yeah,
a show that sparked a lot of similar conversation to the Acolyte, although I think misguided, because we don't get into all my thoughts on season 1, but I enjoyed season 1 a lot more than I think a lot of people did. I think a lot of the critiques and stuff, there's valid stuff, but a lot of it was just culture war. It was woke Amazon or whatever it was. It was this Hollywood. And they're ruining Tolkien's legacy, and it's a bunch of people that haven't actually read any of Tolkien beyond watching the movies, but they know that Tolkien's rolling around in his grave. So we don't need to retread my whole thoughts on that. But season 2 is out. Again, I probably won't do. Maybe I'll do the end of the season review. But I'm not going to be doing episode reviews because I just don't necessarily have time, and I just want to enjoy it. I don't want to be thinking about reviews when I watch my Tolkien. But I thought we could just briefly share our thoughts, because you've seen the first episode. Yeah. I've seen the first 3 that are released. What's your initial takeaway from the new season?
It seems pretty good so far. I'm excited to see where it goes, and I think it's really cool. Kind of, again, it's interesting because it falls in a time where sort of the eventual outcome of all the machinations of the different powers at play, but it's kind of an interesting ride to see, okay, so how does this work out, and how do the various powers and allegiances
it's kind of the danger, not drawback, but of all prequels, of you sort of know, Anakin's going to become Darth Vader, this, Sauron's what's going to happen to him, and that a ring is coming in the future, but I feel like there's more to storytelling than just surprising people with ending. Right. There is sort of that character journey, and that's what I've liked about the first 3 seasons. I get complaints, my brother texted me, Rings of Power is boring. And I get that. It's slow. It's not, I think it gets better as the season goes, episode 3.
Which I feel like that's what it was, I think the first season. I feel like if I remember correctly, it was a bit slow, and it slowly picked up speed and more action.
Yeah, it's sort of a slow
towards
burn.
The end.
And again, maybe this is my own preferences, but I don't mind that. I do want this story to move forward, and there's times when the show does drag, but to me, I like these characters talking about weighty things and their own motivations and sort of positioning, and because to me that's again some of the details of the lore for Tolkien totally out of whack and changed, and some of it by necessity, some of it just sort of weird decisions that I don't get. It's in that way, it's not true to Tolkien at all. But I feel the spirit of it, though, if you read, the stories about this time that he wrote, there's action, there's battles and stuff, but a lot of it's just sort of these characters having these big, weighty conversations, and the motivations of these elves or this person, that's almost more true in a sense than even the Peter Jackson movies, which were more kind of Hollywood action movies. That's really not what the Lord of the Rings was. So I'm okay with that, and I feel personally I find it refreshing too. I guess you haven't got to some of the good conversations, but I just think the dialogue is good. Maybe not all of it, but there's just some good conversations it's not I don't know the religious beliefs of the people making the show necessarily, but I think they capture some of that of just themes of fathers and sons forgiving each other, or friendship, or there's some of those Christian virtues that I feel the show has been able to sort of capture and communicate it, I think, in an interesting way, for Christians or for anyone.
Well, and I think too, just at least sort of the elvish storyline, capturing that idea of your people are in great peril. What are you willing to do to come out of that, even if perhaps with these rings, there could be unknown consequences. Well, in fact, there could very well be bad consequences that are just kind of pushed down the road, and we're not sure what all that entails. But so these conversations they had, at least in the first episode, of to take the rings or not take the rings, and I don't know. I find all that really interesting, and just sort of the more, I guess, continental sort of shifts and power plays that are happening. And I don't know. I'm more, I think, with you on this, and I think it's a really interesting and so far very well done show. And you see the Sauron character, you see his development, and I think that's really kind of cool to see. And it reminds me a little bit of the idea of prequels. Like, what ultimately happens, but there is something really fascinating about the journey to get there. And I had recently seen Songbirds and Snakes, the prequel to The Hunger Games, where it's like, well, who this person ends up being, but the way in which they ultimately get there, at least in that movie, in that story, it's done really well. And it's like, okay, that's entertaining to see, and it's interesting and thought-provoking to see how this person's journey leads them to be ultimately who they are.
Because here's, again, you get 2 rants for the price of 1. I won't actually rant about this, but it is another thing that makes me think of, again, in some ways I feel like the Game of Thrones show kind of ruined expectations for people. Like, again, if you like the show or whatever, I think it's well executed maybe, but like the idea that like this, it became sort of synonymous with like nobody's safe. Like the main character in that show gets killed and like partway through the first season and he's dead, and it's like, oh, like if he can die, anyone can die. And it's sort of this, and you've seen sort of since that show and the books came out, like that's sort of been the thing of like, if you want to shock people and show the stakes, like you got to show that they can die. And like, so you just, character deaths have become sort of this like cheap, tool for storytellers. Oh, see, it's shocking, it's gritty, like people can die. And like, again, I think that can work effectively when characters die, but I feel like because we've got so used to that, like you hear people critique things like a prequel and be like, well, obviously we know they live, like, and it's like, but well, yeah, we do, but like death, like life and death is not the only stake or conflict for a character. Like, there's, I don't even think it's the most interesting one. I think the more interesting ones are more the like, internal struggles of like, well, okay, we know they live, but like, what decisions do they have to make along the way, and like, what do they have to push back against or give into, or like, what do they sacrifice inside?
Right.
Like, I feel like there's way deeper sort of themes that you can do as a storyteller beyond just like, well, here's a character and like he could die, he could not die. Like, that's the sole tension as an audience. You sit back waiting to see if he'll live. Like, because like Batman's not going to die in a Batman movie. Like, Superman's, I mean, I guess he does die temporarily in at least one Batman. Like, or Superman. Like, the main characters almost never die. Like, that's or otherwise the story would be short and kind of a bummer. Like, because it's not always about that. And I feel like this show, again, you sort of know, at least I know, I've read the book, like, I know exactly what happens to all these characters, but but I feel like the more interesting storytelling stuff is like those more moral dilemmas and conversations. And I think this show is capturing it. We'll see how the rest of the season goes. Again, I've been watching, I can watch it with my kids, and it's episode 3 when it starts. You'll know what I'm talking about. It gets a little dark for a 9-year-old, but like for the most part,
episode 1, the start of episode 1 was rather dark.
Yeah, it gets dark, but I'm hoping they don't go too dark. But at least for now, they do have some of that kind of Tolkien-esque hope that sort of shines through enough where they are really engaged with the story. But speaking of kids and screens and media, kind of the last conversation for us today is this something I found interesting. And it's maybe a little different than something that we would normally talk about here, but it is connected to pop culture because it's connected to Drew Barrymore, the actress, now
pop cultural icon.
She's been around forever, like since she was like 7. I think she was 7 in E.T.
Which I had forgotten that she was in E.T. Like I had totally forgotten that she was in that movie.
Yeah, I guess crazy. And then she's been around in various capacities, like acting or whatever in the industry. Like, I mean, that's a long time. Like,
that's a long.
E.T. came out a while ago.
Yeah.
So she's just an interesting person. I know she came under fire was during the COVID stuff when she was going to try and film, through the strike, and she wanted to and people criticized her because she was going to try and film some of her show just without some of the writers, and because there's other people she needed to pay that were working that weren't writers, and everyone got mad at her for and she had to give a groveling apology and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like she's always been someone that at least, I don't know about always, but at least recently is willing to just sort of speak from her heart and take the hits, even if it's a sort of an unpopular decision. And she had a kind of a, I don't know what you would call it, like an essay, a post, an Instagram, like multi-slide. You got to.
I'd definitely call it an essay.
Just sort of sharing her own thoughts on, her career and her, the transition now that she's a mother, and particularly focused on, like phones and like media and like. As a mother now, with the background she has, her experiences, her mistakes, and what she had to go through as a young woman coming up in Hollywood, and then now looking as a mother, and her own kids, and how do you keep them from having to experience some of that? So she touches on several things, and then we can kind of get into it a little bit, because I think they are definitely relevant questions for Christians. And kind of the main question that I want us to keep in mind for this is just, as I was thinking about this, is the idea of like, as Christians, like we should be plugged into culture. That's the whole, we wouldn't be doing this podcast if we didn't believe that. But like,
Yeah.
you know, at what point do we sort of like ride that inevitable wave of like, this is the way the culture is. You know, the genie's not going back in the bottle. We got to embrace that and just sort of go with it, and you know, and just sort of adapt with the times, because there's times when we need to do that. And at what other points like do we sort of swim against the current and say like, this is the way the culture's going, but that's a bad way. So like, we might not be able to swim very far up current, but like we're at least going to try and like hold back some of that, because that's sort of what her post is about. She talks about you know many things, like she references or she did like a photo shoot for Playboy magazine when she was like 19. She's like a teenager doing this shoot, and she mentions in the essay, says, I thought it would be a magazine that was unlikely to resurface because it was paper. I never knew that there would be an internet. I didn't know many things. And just sort of using that as her reference for like just the permanence of some of this stuff that we take for granted. That, you know, things that we say or do that we think are just going to be gone, you know, silly things we do as like a teenager or a young person, like can actually remain for a long time. And even more so in this digital age. So she says, which leads me to my kids. Now that I'm a mother, I cannot believe I am in a world that correlates to my own personal pitfalls and many of my peers who got too much too soon. Kids are not supposed to be exposed to this much. Kids are supposed to be protected. Kids are supposed to hear no. But we are living in an a la carte system as caretakers in a modern, fast-moving world where tiny little computers are in every adult's hands, modeling that it's okay to be attached to such a device that is a portal to literally everything. How did we get there? And then later she says, remember my childhood? How are we allowing kids to have this much access for brains that are not fully developed and group texts? These texts can get so toxic, and we must protect our children from being put in scenarios where they cannot always control the rhetoric of the multi-party dynamics that can get put on record or on a cloud, only for potentially haunt them one day. So very much like just thinking about like this the influence of phones and screens, and like the way that much like her own like privilege of like, you know, she's in Hollywood and money, like that opened her up to a world of stuff that she wasn't ready for. And like, you know, she shares in the thing, like she, like, you know, attempted to commit suicide as a young person. Like she was sort of lost all hope. She went
to rehab for a couple of years too, I think.
Yeah. And like she was like somewhere on all the magazine covers and like, you know, tabloid, her career was over, and she is able to like get through that. But saying like nowadays, like phones can almost offer that to everyone. Like they can offer access to things that like, you know, that we shouldn't have access to, or kids shouldn't have access to. What are some of your thoughts? Because we are both parents, so like of young kids that mine are a little older. So like getting close to the conversation of like I mean, without any connection of people knowing we're talking about this, like yesterday, one of my boys was like almost in tears talking to my wife, saying like, you know, that he doesn't have a phone because his friends are starting to get phones. Like they're in 4th grade, and like so like. It's like, well, I'm actually talking about that on the podcast. So it very much is a relevant conversation. But what are some of your initial takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, my kids are a few years behind yours, and so thankfully I don't have to hear the tear-filled pleas as to why do you hate me so much? And if you loved me, you'd get me whatever all the other kids have. But yeah, I mean, this is like 100%. I'm swimming against the grain on this one. And I don't even know how much it is against the grain. And what I would love to hear from are the parents of your son's kids. I'm not your son's, the parents of your son's friends, who are getting these phones in 4th grade. That's, 9, 10 years old. What's the pitch there? Like, because I feel like most people that I talk to, and my wife and I, we had this conversation last night actually, and she didn't realize that we were talking about this on the podcast today. But who are these parents? And again, not to sound judgmental, but what's the reasoning behind giving your child a smartphone? I would say before the age of 16. definitely before, like, I don't know, 13, 14. Like, what's so compelling that they need a smartphone at such a young age? Because I feel like at least our generation seems to be very much in the camp of like, yeah, our kids are not getting phones, or at least not phones that have unfettered access to the big wide world. And so to me, at least a lot of what I'm hearing is like, yeah, we're not doing, like, we're delaying phone, at least smartphone usage for as long as possible. And so I'm very much in the camp with Drew on this one. Is like, we should be protecting children, and I think, they only get one childhood. And I mean, you can read countless stories of childhoods ruined by smartphones, and not even stuff that's like necessarily out there in public, but just the toxicity of undeveloped brains on a group text, or just even within their peer group. It's like, this is insanity.
Well, and the crazy thing too is like, because again, we can, like the undeveloped brains can be taken as like a, as a condescending thing. But like, you think of like people that are not young 12-year-olds, like, and like social media and like all that access, like that ruins us. Like there's a bunch of like, boomers or millennials like that are on social media that I'm like, probably shouldn't be. Like, like,
what are you doing there? Like, you're a grown adult posting that.
And you can see almost in real time them get like corrupted by it. And it's like, we can't handle it. Yeah. And like we've seen like the, the bad fruit of it. It's like, why would my 9-year-old
to me, it's insanity. And I feel like it's almost, I don't know, maybe this is extreme, but it would almost border on like child abuse in some ways. That's probably too harsh of a term, but exposing your children to this level of,
it's not doing them any favors.
No, like not at all. Like 100% negative.
I mean, even if I wasn't doing like work stuff where we sort of need social media or like promoting things, like I probably wouldn't need. Like, I'd be fine to not have it because it's hard to think of very many things that like a phone gives me access to that I would say are beneficial to me. Like, like there are things, and she gets into it in her essay, like we need dumb phones. We don't need smartphones. Like, we need phones that can text. Like there's things like I have all my music on there, GPS, like even places I go to like every week, I still put it in the GPS just because I'm dumb and don't know how to drive around. Like, there are things that hey, it'd be good to have. Like, hey, my kids go to someone else's house or just to the neighbors and we need them to come home for dinner. Like, it'd be nice to just send them a text instead of having to go walk out there and go grab. Like, there are things that are good from phones. I think what she's getting at is not just like phones as a thing, as much as it is like kind of the social media, the social dimensions of it. And like my teacher's a high school teacher. Like, she sees this, like the different like group message things that go around, and like they're horrible. Like, they're just awful. Yeah. Like, there's like kids telling other kids to kill themselves, and like it's like a private Christian school, and like like there's tons of stuff. And I feel like we're at the point too where like there's no excuse to not be informed on it, because like in some ways it's almost like smoking has become, where like there's like Jonathan Haidt just had a new book. I haven't read it yet. I bought it, but I've heard a lot about it. The Anxious Generation, and he's like a prominent like psychologist who's probably done the most research into this, as far as like he particularly focuses on teenage girls and like the influence of screen time, and said like there's a direct line, it's not ambiguous, of like anxiety and depression and suicide that can be traced to just screen time access. Like there's the data is very clear, but there's still sort of the sense of like, well, it is, but like my kid's a good kid, and like I'm tired, and it'd be nice for them to be able to just like be on their phone, and I can sit on the couch and watch football or something. Like, I don't know. And like, and I don't know necessarily where I'll land on that. Like, 'cause like I haven't had to make that decision. Like I know Christians can get chided for being, like their kids come home from college and it's like, oh, you put your phone in the Tupperware bin. Like, you're going to get it when you leave for college. Like, very, like, I read every text my kid ever sends. Like, sort of some of that, which I don't know. Like, I feel like I hope I can trust my kids to a point where like I don't need to be
Yeah.
looking over their shoulder at all times. I hope I can instill enough like character in them. Like it's like I know you can take it too far, and that's maybe easier to like see. Well, I don't want to be that, so give them their phone at 6 and like see how they like. You can. It's easy to push back against that, but that doesn't mistake the need to like for Christians to be very intentional, and like it's okay to swim upstream. Like I know even like with the COVID and like the digital church age, and it's like, well, everything is digital now, like we're gonna dive right in because that's where the people are, and it's like, well,
still doesn't make it better.
yeah, it's like, well, that might be the way things are going, but like that's worse than, I mean, there's benefits if people can't come to church or whatever, but like a digital church is not the same as a physical church.
Well, it's still a poor substitution.
Yeah, and it's like, well, maybe that's where people are going, but like we need to keep emphasizing this because this is what Jesus called us to, and like, there's advantages to that community, shoulder to shoulder in the flesh, that you don't get kind of anonymously signing in and just watching while you fold laundry or cook lunch. Like, like there's times when it's like, okay, culture, we want to be relevant, but like it doesn't mean we just like jump in the boat, put the sail up and just go wherever it takes us.
Yeah, and again, that's why I go back to like I'd love to hear from parents who have made that decision to say, yeah, I'll give my 12-year-old, my 10-year-old an iPhone. Like, walk me through that decision tree. What led you to that? And if it was, I was just tired and they needed a phone, then that's an issue. Like, that's a problem. Because I don't see anyone who has thought about this for any length of time that comes to the conclusion that having a phone at 10 is a good idea. Having a smartphone at 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 is a good idea. And so to me, it's almost more like the kids who are getting these phones, like we need to have a really compelling conversation to say, why on earth would this be a good thing for you to do? And of course, that's the social element of this, I think, and this is where you sort of bring in the school at large, is you go to school, you don't need a phone at school because you're at school. Like, I don't see why anybody needs a phone while they're like in grade school. Like, what are you going to do? If you need to call your parents, you can go to the office and like there's people there and they all have your parents' numbers. Like, so it's not a matter of being in touch with your kid. And I think this is where schools can step up and can set some ground rules. And I have heard of schools doing this where it's like, we're like a school, a phone-free school, or some sort of baseline where it's like, it's not a matter of the haves and the have-nots, because that's ultimately if you don't take a strong stance on this as a school, you end up in a place where
it's the peer pressure
a few people with questionable parents end up kind of ruining it for all the other kids who now see what they have and they want it too, and it kind of snowballs into this whole mess. And so I would also put a lot of emphasis on schools making those decisions for those kids to say, look, if you're going to come to our school, and I think especially private schools are in a better position to do this, because it's like, we're a private school. Like, we have rules at private schools.
Yeah, like he's got to wear a uniform. That's just a rule.
Right.
Don't question it.
You can make these rules. And I think parents would do well to bring that up at school parent meetings and stuff and say, hey, look, because it is. I mean, that's where I think the rubber meets the road. Is because you can make that decision for your own children, but then they go into an environment where maybe they're the only kid with parents that make that decision. And so now you're facing this like immense peer pressure for your kid to get this phone or do whatever. And it's like that's not helping the situation, because it's not like giving into that is doing no favors to your kid.
And I would say, and we can end on this for the conversation, but I think the phone issue is a way higher, more crucial, influential thing than like anything coming out of Hollywood. Like any of those of those sort of like conversations that, well, this cartoon movie had like a same-sex couple in the background, or they said this, or they didn't, this kid was rebellious and went against the 10 Commandments, honor your mother. Like any of those sort of things that we can get like, worked up about.
Those are like way
or
down
even
the
blasphemous.
list.
Like, I think that influence is minimal compared to, like what the addiction of a parent on their phone can do to like, disrupt family dinners or things, or like a kid having access to who knows what on the, the dark reaches. Like, I feel like as Christians, like we should be way more vigilant on phones and stuff than we are on just, Hollywood they're pushing another agenda, and this movie I'm not going to go see anyways. Like,
meanwhile, your 10-year-old is on his iPhone. Like,
and
you've got bigger problems.
It's like anything Hollywood can push, your kid can find quicker and cheaper on their phone. Yeah, like, and probably have, and their classmates are going to show it to them. So like, again, I think it's an important issue. But again, encourage you, like Sam said, if you send us a message, or if you're watching us on YouTube, comment, let us know a bit of, hey, how do you, if you were like ahead of us on the journey of making those decisions, how do you sort of navigate that? And like, what are your plans maybe for your kids of, to combat just some of that pull to kind of go with the current of cell phones. But that is all the time for that segment, because we do want to talk about what's coming out, entertainment options, with the next segment of this podcast episode. We have Out Now and Coming Soon. So really not a whole lot to talk about here. Out Now, The Forge is still out. We've talked a lot about that, so we don't need to get into that. And Rings of Power is out, and we just talked about that.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your all's feedback on that. Are you with Daniel and myself, or are you hating on what they've done? Have they ruined Tolkien for you?
Hopefully not. I do think I have seen, it seems like people, at least a little bit, that the second season so far has been received better than, like, people are, hey, this seems, and some of that's just that the show is getting more to like the actual lore event, like the stuff that isn't as made up or fan fiction, which I'll do a rant on that another day. But as far as things that are out, things that are coming soon, the big movie coming out this week is Beetlejuice. Did you ever see the first Beetlejuice?
No, this was, for whatever reason, I was just never into.
Yeah, I was never into it either, so I haven't seen it, but I am seeing Beetlejuice actually in a couple hours today. I'll be going as far as recording this, but it will probably already be out, the review, when this episode drops. I don't know, Tim Burton, I like his visual style, like Tim Burton, but like there's a reason I haven't seen the first one. Like, there's this thing about these that just doesn't do it for me. Yeah. So we'll see. It seems like it's tracking to make a lot of money. So
it's one of those, like, I think cult classics, and like it has a following, and it has like people. There are people who really are devoted to this, but then I think there's everybody else who's just kind of like, meh. Okay.
Yeah, so we'll see. Maybe I'll like it and want to go back and watch the first one. Then the other one, we'll get into more next week. But there's another faith-based film, God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. Stay tuned on our channels, because I was actually able to interview one of the actors for that movie, and I'll have my review because I've already seen it coming out shortly, and I have some thoughts on it. So
I bet you do. So I can't wait.
Stay tuned for that.
Whatever could they be?
But speaking of thoughts that people have on things, the last segment of this podcast episode, we have things we like that you should like too.
So I thought I'd keep it maybe a little bit light this week, as we've kind of delved into some heavier topics on today's podcast. But the thing I like this week, and I've been just barely reminded of, just a little glimpse of, and that is the season of autumn, better known as fall, pumpkin spice season to some. But I went outside this morning even, and it was like in the 60s, and boy, oh boy, am I delighted that fall is finally, at least, somewhat coming. I always like get my hopes up way too high, and like at the first hint of a slightly cooler morning, I'm like, yes, finally. But I'm just so thrilled to be out of the hopefully sweltering heat of July and August. We're here in Georgia, so apologies if you're in Canada or someplace and you're dreading the onset of winter, but I could not be more thrilled with the changing of this season.
Oh, are you? I am. This is one of the few times that we align on things that we
our Venn diagrams of interest has finally.
Like fall, like it's not just a season. Like it's a full on vibe for me. Like
totally.
Fall means like sweaters, and it means like this is the comfort food.
We have a wood fireplace at our house, and let me tell you, when the temperatures really get down, that thing's going almost 24/7, and I couldn't be happier. Like I just love fire, s'mores, outdoors.
Although I will say, arguably, there's nothing more overrated on this planet Earth than pumpkin spice. I don't do like the drinks, and I'm not. I just don't like flavored drinks. I'm a total coffee snob about that.
But I will say something we've started doing, a family tradition, is in fall we will make pumpkin chocolate chip pancakes on Saturday. We always make pancakes on Saturdays, and then we switch to pumpkin chocolate chip pancakes for the fall, and that's pretty good. But I don't drink my pumpkin. I eat it.
Yeah, God made pumpkins in a solid form. But yeah, as soon as you see me on these episodes starting to wear my hoodies again, you'll notice a bigger smile on my face.
Yeah,
I'm very excited for fall and get out of my summer depression.
Yeah.
I like the cold, bitter months of the year. I don't know what that says about me. But what we can say about you is that we are thankful that you have joined us once again for just a lot of fun, interesting stuff to get into. I know we enjoy every week just looking at what's going on and just whether we have all the answers or we're just trying to get the answers or we land on bad answers. Just the whole process of talking about it, I think this is very beneficial for Christians. So we are glad that you joined us, and we hope you will join us again next week every Thursday for more conversations on faith and pop culture.